Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ian Prosser. I'm the Director of Railway Safety and His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Railways. I have to keep reminding everyone it's his. I've been in this role now for nearly 15 years, and I actually last week announced that I will be retiring next year and have resigned from ORR so that they've got time to actually find a good replacement. So it's been a long time in the job, but I have enjoyed it, and I think we've seen some real improvements in my time at ORR. So my structure of my presentation is basically going to be, I'm going to set the scene, our long-standing vision and goal, and this is quite long-standing because it was put in place when I first joined. Some of the challenges, and we've seen the major incidents in the last 10 years of Sandylands and Carmont, and the focus. Areas what I think the whole sector going forward should focus in on, particularly over the next few years, because there's some real challenges ahead. So, about 14 years ago, we have had the same vision and goal for the rail industry and sector. This was something that I asked at my board to put in place when I first joined, and we were developing an OR strategy at the time. And the vision is very simple. Zero industry cause fatalities and ever decreasing risk to the passengers, the workforce and the public. And I've stood by that vision, and so has the ORR, since we put that in place. But how? And to me, it's through the goal of excellence in health and safety management and risk control. And then when people asked me, when I was talking early on in my career at ORR, what do I mean by that and how do we know where we are? We came up with a way in which we can measure it. And the team put together what we call RM3, Risk Management Maturity Model. And you'll see on our stand just on the corner there, books that describe the model. Ours is just round the corner on the left-hand side. And that is now really, over the years, it took some time to establish, but it is now actually, and it's a very simple sort of basic model, word model that's got the 26 elements. But the key thing to me is that it's now established throughout the sector. We've even got a version for the heritage sector, which you'll see on our stand. And Network Rail has now embraced it in each of its regions. And so it's a tool in which it's not about just the scores on the doors, but it's about continuous improvement. It's about understanding your strengths and weaknesses. And it's about helping each other and comparing where I think we are good and where we're not so good. And it's about having what we call a conversation. And it's really pleasing now that we have a governance board for this model that has got members from the whole sector on board and the trade unions as well. And it's also been adopted in other parts of the world as a way in which you can measure excellence in health and safety management. So, going forward, some of the highlights, the sector highlights in the last little while. We have seen over the last 3 and a bit years track worker safety improvements following our improvement notices, and I now can retire on the basis that we will very rarely have flags, whistles and horns on the railway in the 21st century, which is a goal I set in the industry a good few years ago. And we've seen a dramatic drop in the number of incidents, but there's still work to do. There's always work to do, and the introduction of new technology there. There's been really strong collaboration and good safety performance of duty holders involved in the startup, a very successful startup of the Elizabeth line. And as we've just been mentioning, everyone now thinks what a wonderful piece of railway that is and how much of a difference it makes to people. A few years beforehand, it was all complaints about cost, time, and the rest of it. But just go and look at that piece of engineering. It is fantastic. As a group, we've had to work significantly, working with the department around and health and safety executive and others to understand the potential implications of the retained EU oil bill. And that's been a very strong collaborative effort. And as I mentioned, we continue to use RM3 and enhance its use and work with the sector to get better collaboration with and amongst duty holders. And I think the opportunities will really emerge there in the creation of Great British Railways, where train operators and infrastructure managers will be able to work much closer together and share where they are with their safety management. And I think that's a real opportunity for the future. So I implore people to take it. However, we have seen in 2016 and in 2020 two serious incidents which we hadn't seen for quite a number of years, actually since Grey Rig in 2007. Sandylands, which has just completed the trial, and the driver was found not guilty, but Carmont as well. And there has been important lessons learned from both these incidents and a great deal of work done by their sectors, in particular the light rail sector and obviously Network Rail in terms of weather risk management. However, we've also seen, and this is a big challenge for the future, a number of structures and earthwork failures due to the extreme weather. And I'll talk more about this later. But public behaviour has changed since the pandemic, and public fatalities at the interface with the railway and level crossings and trespass still quite common and tragically too often. And we've seen some behaviour around people's interaction with the railway, and young people in particular, which we need and trying to address. And there's also, and it's been talked about this morning, issues in managing change and its impact on people. And it's very important when you change that they understand why, and you involve them in those changes, so that they've got a clear idea of why things are happening and how they can actually participate and be involved in the actual change itself and actually sometimes shape it. And that was one of the things about the Track Worker Safety Programme. You know, there was a good line of communication from the leader to people on the ground and actually an understanding of what they think. Because there sometimes, and it's true that things that we've said this morning, people do not necessarily always want change to happen. And incidents, and this is quite an important one going forward, I think very important one going forward, we've seen incidents regarding safety critical software and changes being made to software that drives an awful lot of our trains and our systems on the railway that have not gone to plan. And there's been issues in relation to things that have gone wrong. So these are the areas I think also that people need to really focus on. So over the next 3 years, there are some big issues to manage. You know, we've come through the pandemic, we've had a year of industrial disputes, the railway's in a very different place than it was in 2019, and you've heard some of the financial implications this morning. So we've got on the agenda workforce reform, which is important to achieve improvements in our efficiency and effectiveness and to address the financial position of the industry. Recovery. There has been a drop in passengers, quite significant, as was outlined this morning, and with a shift from commuter to leisure travel. So we've got a very sort of changing atmosphere. So the potential of risks, though, arising from major change programs that are emerging across the industry. We are probably around about the safest we've ever been, both in terms of overall system risk, both in LUL and on the mainline railway, if you look at the models. But Network Rail's workforce safety is as good as ever been in its contractors. But the challenge is to remain what I call with chronic unease about how we move forward, because it's very easy to lose things. And so therefore vigilance is really, really important. And we should not underestimate the challenges going forward. So I tried to group, and this is how it will be presented in my last Chief Inspector's annual report, which will be launched on July the 19th. And really, I think there's 3 big areas of challenge. Industry change and challenge and change, which someone described. New technology and innovation, which is vital, but we have to find a way of doing it better. And leadership supporting our people. The industry has been through quite 3 years of difficult times. And we did run the railways really quite successfully, I believe, during COVID for the nation. And it was so important that we did. but there's an importance that we do show leadership and support the people, because it's the frontline people that keep the railway safe each and every day. Those roles that are involved in either inspection or train driving or some of the others, those safety critical roles are those that keep the industry safe on a day-by-day basis. And we must not forget that. So, industry challenge and change. The Mainline Railway, and you've heard a lot about this morning, has ambitious reform proposals to create a new guiding mind in Great British Railways. There's inflationary pressures and fiscal constraint. So that's what's so important is that everyone focuses on the day job to ensure a safe and healthy railway during uncertainty. Day job is the key, and I wrote to the industry last December reminding them that their frontline management and senior management and directors and chief executives focus on the day job. Network Rail's committed to modernising its workforce practices, but it's important that they are brought in and implemented safely and well, and that needs to involve those that are being affected by it and taking their views on board. And it's good now that local consultation is taking place in the routes, which is where it's really important to ensure that people understand the changes that are going to be made and they're done safely. And I have a team of 2 inspectors fully dedicated to the modernisation programme in Network Rail, and they are attending some of those, as observers, some of those consultation events. Trams has come an awful long way since Sandylands, and we did a review of LSRB, the Light Rail Safety and Standards Board, which was a positive. And we're continuing some of the oversight of some of the RAID recommendations that's still to be completed, particularly implementation of automatic speed control and driver attention systems. And the heritage sector we have focused on quite a lot in the last year or two. Simply, they suffered through COVID and through financial constraints, and we continue to engage across the sector in order to maintain and increase its management of risk capability. And that's why, in collaboration with the Heritage Railway Association, we developed a heritage version, which is a cut-down version of RM3 to help them understand their strengths and weaknesses. And they've got some copies of that on our stand as well. New technology and innovation, and you've heard a lot about that this morning if you've been here. But we do need to make sure that we employ safety by design of new systems and technology. We seem to struggle bringing in new systems, particularly software systems, and it's so important that we actually do the work up front to make sure that we know what we're doing and take the opportunities to take risk out at the design stage. Network Rail have introduced some new protections to improve track worker safety, but that still needs to go further, faster, and properly involve the user to drive their buying. There's some real opportunities to give extra protection for line blocks and make sure that what's put in place is used effectively by the front line. And we expect, and it is happening, the rollout of improved weather forecasting and remote condition monitoring to cope with some of the climate change issues that we've discussed, so that we improve operational planning and mitigation of the risks of extreme weather. And Network Rail already started and have made some quite significant improvements to their risk management since Carmont, and in the granularity of weather forecasting. And it's also important not to lose sight of the fact that we've got a lot of work in this industry still to do on electrical safety. And some of the methods that are still in use are quite old and do not meet the regulations. And what's also important is industry capability for introducing and operating existing and new technologies needs to develop. And that includes the support for robust risk assessment. We're still not strong enough in this area in introducing new technology, understanding all the risks and hazards associated with it, and addressing those at the early stages of the design. And testing software that sometimes the supply chain of this is quite long. And very often overseas, and not always the operators themselves have expertise in this area, and we're relying on the the manufacturers. And we've got to look at, actually, and we are starting to look at, how we can regulate that part of the sector, because at the moment we focus on duty holders, and that's how the legislation works. But with we think some small modifications to regulations, we could have a stronger impact at the manufacturing stage of these processes. Leadership and supporting people. Just have a getting dry. Over my time in this job, there's been some really significant strides made in improving health management. In fact, having it on the agenda at all. When I took over this role, I had sort of half a person working on health, and so did RSSB. But we've made some really important improvements, but there's still a long way to go. And believe you me, when we're now starting to see some of the data that's been collected, you know, the issues of the impact on people in terms of health is far greater than that of safety. So strong leadership is required to implement change and keep the momentum going in this difficult climate of change and financial issues. So it's very important to support and invest in people to rebuild the discretionary effort needed to run a high-performing railway. And that means also must include collaborating with the trade unions. They have a lot to offer local health and safety reps, and it's important that they're engaged and thought of as important contributors. Because it's very important, the industry needs to better understand and support human performance in managing safety, particularly with new systems, improve industry safety investigations and understanding of incident factors. There's still some real improvements there that can be made. And in pressing for a step change in the management of fatigue. Fatigue is an important and interesting issue that we need to address further going forward. And we'll be modifying our guidance later this year in an attempt to make sure that it's up to date and takes into account best practice. And in fact, I've actually got a pretty new team now that has been re-established in the area of human factors. Health. And one of the ways in which we can show that we care is that that we look after people's health. And I'm really pushing and pleased that Network Rail are bringing their health, occupational health management back in-house and getting some standardisation. And that will actually also be a good stepping stone for Great British Railways, so that people are not driving around the country trying to get an occupational health appointment. It's important that this shows that we care, and this is a huge financial loss to this sector. We talked about needing to save money. When we first put our health programme together, and the second one, the industry estimated that we're losing about £350 million a year through ill health. So that's money that, and it's imperative from a moral point of view that we actually take much more interest in people's health. And it has, I'm not saying, it has been 10 years, there has been some real strides forward, but we've got to keep that momentum and actually take it further, because it's not just a safety, health benefit, it's also an efficiency and productivity benefit for the industry. So we need to build on our benchmarking data and our health management capability, including better health risk assessments. And at this point, I'll also mention mental health. Mental health, and we're sharing our stand with the Samaritans, is something that we really need to focus in on very strongly over the next few years. And we have improved as a sector. We have mental health first aiders. And we are, with the Samaritans as a sector, relaunching what was once called the Million Hour Challenge in a follow-on initiative called Do Good, Feel Good, and the benefits of volunteering, in terms of making it also clear that it doesn't necessarily have to be volunteering as a listening volunteer. I'm a trustee at the Cambridge Samaritans, and there are all sorts of opportunities to actually help people in terms of helping the Samaritans in either fundraising or even small things around administration. But improving mental health is going to be a real challenge, and making sure that we try and look after each other in the next few years. And we will continue also to engagement with the heritage sector to strive for more mature and consistent understanding of approach to leadership and self-report. These heritage railways are important to local communities. We heard about the importance of connectivity and housing, etc., from Peter about the modern railways. But in some local communities, these railways are actually very important from an economic perspective. And their success, you know, some of them have been struggling, but their success in the future is important to local people. Thank you very much for listening, and look out for our Chief Inspector's annual report in July the 19th. Thank you very much.
Let's take a seat over there.
Where should I sit? Over there?
Oh, you choose your chair. I'm not that rude. Thank you so much. That was a really interesting presentation, and I saw a lot of nodding around the room as you were talking, which is always a positive thing from my perspective. You spoke a lot about staff in your presentation, quite rightly, I think as we'd all expect. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask on your views of the push to automate a lot of roles across rail. So automation of those positions, potentially eliminating staff roles or in some cases enhancing, admittedly. But what's your take on the role of automation in rail?
Well, if we do it properly and well, you know, automation can bring real safety benefits, and like ECTS level 2 would bring real safety benefits, and it doesn't actually replace the role of the driver, but it enhances the role of the driver, and it enhances safety. So if it's managed well, it's a real opportunity to make significant improvements both that in safety and in efficiency. And I don't think we cannot resist change, and it's really important that we actually embrace new technology to actually make our product, the railways, efficient and effective and attractive to people we need to help, need to get back onto it.
Yeah.
You know, we've got a challenge in getting people back onto the railways. You know, some of our ticketing systems, things like that. We need to improve so that people understand the product, and that we help the workforce, because there's always going to be the need for people on the railways because of the interaction with so large numbers of people. Help the workforce embrace that change and grow and train into perhaps more fulfilling roles.
Yeah, enhancing roles and making roles safer and easier, ultimately.
Yeah, taking, you know, one of the most important things about track worker safety is taking people away from extremely dangerous situations. You know, being in amongst high-speed trains, it's not really something that we should have allowed to go on as much as we were for so long, because it is a very hazardous situation, and you know, you're looking at human error that can make that happen. You know, and it's understandable sometimes. Not blaming anyone, but you put them into difficult situations. So, you know, the changes that have been made there have been fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did have an excellent presentation on ETCS yesterday. So if you missed that, I do recommend watching the recording because it was excellent. You talked a little bit about, or well, we talked quite a lot, obviously, about digital processes and digital enhancements in rail, but specifically thinking about the digital attack area and cybersecurity. How high on the agenda is that as we move forward?
That's it's going up the agenda in terms of importance. We have, even as a regulator, we have done some work in the last couple of years in providing a training package for my inspectors. We've done a inspection template and protocol and we've trialled it to look at a company, duty holders' arrangements around cybersecurity. And so it's going to be increasingly important, particularly as we come to systems like ECTS, and train systems, which are the potential for attack is greater. Yeah,
absolutely. So we need to make sure that we've got that cyber resilience across the industry. I'd love to open up to the audience if anyone has any questions. The gentleman over here.
Carmont is a case of very much monitoring and accounting for things not being done as specified. We also have the revision of OPAS, which has led to some spectacular failures of stations things falling down, things falling apart, largely because the feedback loop wasn't there. How can we actually get that feedback loop working? When something is wrong, the input says it is wrong, you need to do something about it, and then there is an audit trail that says something has been done about it.
I think some of the things that will happen with the creation of Great British Railways will help in some places about getting those feedback loops, but it's also about assurance, about ensuring that having some assurance that those things actually have happened, not just said they've happened, and actually good monitoring and assurance, and that's one of the big elements of RM3, is that feedback loop, and it's important, and that's an area that sometimes in difficult times people drop the ball on, and it's so important that you don't. So it's really making sure, and through your assessments, like RM3 assessments, looking at how well that assurance process is.
Absolutely. We have my colleague here in the blue shirt.
Hi, thanks. Jeff Hancock's East West Rail. Thank you for your talk, Ian. You made a comment earlier about the Elizabeth line and the success you had with that. Could you just talk a bit more to what was really good about the engagement with that company and the outcome it led to?
I couldn't quite hear that because
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Jeff Hancock's East West Rail. You talked about the Elizabeth line in your presentation, and I'm curious to know more about what were the success factors with engaging with that company leading to the authorisation of the railway?
Well, what we had was very active engagement all the way through. Consistent engagement, because one particular inspector was involved virtually the whole way through, and it was very active. We worked with them closely through the assurance processes. We actually suggested things to them that helped them that process. And one of the things that also helped was the engagement, for example, that MTR had with their train drivers as well. So there was, they were involved early on, and they were kept in the loop. And some of the workarounds and things they accepted that we made them feel that they were safe, that actually helped progress the commissioning. So it was very active involvement, and I think that's what's really important from a regulator, in both on the train side, the control system side, and the overall health and safety management side. We had a team really that worked with them all the way through.
Brilliant. Anyone else? Just a colleague at the back? Oh, she's disappeared. Shout.
You talked about some of the assurance around climate change and extreme weather events. Is there any more regulation or standards going to start being placed around Network Rail and what they've got to do to sort of meet some of the challenges that we're going to face?
So just for anyone listening online, we're asking about standards around climate change and if there's anything else coming through the pipeline on that, as it becomes more of a problem.
Yeah, that was a question.
Network Rail have changed their standards around mitigation and controls for predicted bad weather or heavy rainfall events already, and there's been some changes to other standards around water management as well, and so those will continue to be improved. They're also looking at some trials for very quite sophisticated modelling around the speed restrictions imposed in local areas. So I think those sort of operational standards will change over time as they're continuously improved. But the other key important thing is, in terms of earthworks and structures, is that, well, the biggest area that's being pushed for some real improvement, and that has already started, is that of drainage. Now, drainage was a Cinderella for a long time. We enforced on it 10 years ago, but wasn't enough progress made in terms of understanding all the drainage assets. They still have found lots more since Carmont, and actually having some dedicated resource and carrying out Lord Mayor's recommendations, I'm sure is going to lead to some changes in standards.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, we are at time now. Really, really fascinating presentation. Thank you so much. I think it deserves another round of applause.
Thank you.